I'm Congressman James Lankford. I get a lot of questions about the budget process, and so I'm on the budget committee, and there's so much that's happening right now in the news, both with budget and how bad the government is overspending, but also how much the Senate is not doing anything in the budget process. Now, for 3 years in a row, the Senate's not done a budget at all, and people ask me, what does a budget really do, and how does that work in the federal government? Well, there's three aspects of the federal government, how we do our budgeting process. There's a budget, then there's authorizations, and then there's appropriations. Those are terms that we don't use a lot, but we actually do it a lot as a family. And let me tell you how that works in my family. About every November, December, my wife and I will start talking about next year's budget and what we do and how we're going to spend and what we expect to spend. And then we kind of think that thing out. Well, let me give you an example of that. My daughter's 15, so we're thinking a little bit about next year and getting her a car, which is now this year. So last December, we were thinking about a vehicle for my oldest daughter. Well, we didn't have a lot of specifications with it other than vehicle, and we set a price of around $3,000. We're going to try to save up through the course of the year to set aside by the end of 2012 to get her a vehicle. But that's all that it is. Well, then we started thinking about, well, not just a vehicle, but we started thinking about specifics with it. We started thinking about things like, well, we want them to be airbags, and she wants it to be a two-door, and it's going to have a certain kind of radio or something on it. So now we've got a budget that we're going to put in, about $3,000 for a vehicle, and now we're determining it's going to be a car, not a truck, and it's going to be a two-door, and we're thinking maybe the color red. So that would be the next stage of it. And then the next stage would be actually getting the car. That's a lovely little classic Ford Festiva there. It's red, it's two doors, it's a car. That's a process. Now, what would that look like in the federal government? Now, in the federal government, this would be the budget process of it. The budget just sets the top amount. Here's how much. In this case, $3,000 vehicle. So budgets are broad categories. There's not a lot of specifics to it, but it's a lot of categories. So in a family budget, it may be housing, it may be electricity and utilities, it may be vehicle, it may be gasoline. Those are big, broad categories and big numbers on it. In this example, just vehicle for my daughter, how much we're going to spend, and that's how the budget works. So it's big, broad categories. So when you hear people talk about the budget process, we're just setting things into big categories. And then the second phase of that is something that's called the authorization. The authorization puts detail to it. So in this example, two-door, car, red, it starts putting in some examples. Authorization in the federal budget would mean things like, okay, here's some specifics. If we're going to do defense, these are specific areas that we're going to actually do in defense. This is a specific area we're going to do in the EPA. This is a specific area that we're going to try to do in criminal justice. So it starts putting more definition to it. And then it gets to the very last phase, which is something called appropriation. Appropriations is the final level. In my example of my family, it's when you actually buy it. In the federal government, it's the very specific dollar amount for this particular program at this particular time with all the details. Budget, authorization, appropriation. Those are the three stages we'll work through. And so when you hear people talk about the budget process, you've got to kind of feel out which stage are we in the process, and that'll tell you how much detail comes out of it. There's one more piece, though, that you'll hear a lot of people talk about this particular year, and it's something called reconciliation. When you do a budget, when the House does a budget or the Senate does a budget, and then they need to work on something called the mandatory spending side of things. When they do that, and we're trying to correct and try to work through how do we reduce spending in our budget total area, one of the ways we do it is reconciliation. The House does a budget, the Senate does a budget, the committees that are the authorizing committees will put details of how to be able to pull the dollar amounts back down, then it comes back through the budget process again and goes to the full House. Now there's a more specific plan to do that. It's a little bit different, it's a hybrid, but it's a way specifically designed to reduce spending. Here's the problem. The House of Representatives has done a budget and we've done reconciliation. We passed our reconciliation passage to specifically bring down spending and how it would happen. The Senate refuses to do a budget. People all the time say, well, why is it a problem that the Senate doesn't do a budget? We know what our final numbers are going to be. Let's just appropriate it. We'll get it done with that. What it does is we never get a time to really reduce spending if we never get through this reconciliation process. So step one is really important for the long-term plan, but also for really resolving how we're going to bring down spending. So it's a big deal the Senate's not doing reconciliation right now because we really can't work through dropping our spending. The best we can do in the House is to do our job, put out specific proposals for that, and then launch it over to the Senate and say, it's your turn. We've got to get these things done so we can actually bring it down. That's the plan. That's how it's supposed to work. And we look forward to the day when we can actually get this back to work again and start bringing our spending down even more. It's got to happen as a government. We're over $1 trillion in deficit spending again this year. We've got to be able to have a serious work done between the House and the Senate to bring down this budget and to get us back in line with what we actually have as Americans. Key value that we have is we cannot spend money anymore that we do not have. We've got a plan, we've got to run the plan, and to be able to actually set aside the dollars that are American dollars for the right reason at the right time. Hope this helps. Hope it's a good chance to walk through the budget process.